You're listening to the Signal Cafe, and this is part 3 with Henry Latham. In this episode, we're talking about the mindset that's required to turn Agile theory into practice, what Henry calls the 3 pillars of decision making. What is the focus, right? How does this need to be prioritized? And that's so important.
Yeah, two things there. The first thing what the book is specifically for sort of early stage startup founders, as you said, where you're really sort of everyone is involved a bit in everything. But also, I actually fundamentally disagree with the idea that you have a team where so firstly, in the early stage startup, you're just not going to have a product owner. Like that is a sort of trained role because,
right.
It's 4 people. It's not just simply not going to happen. So you get to 8 people or so. So first, it's unrealistic. Second of all, it does not make sense to me that the thing that's fundamental to everyone, the whole business, is how are we doing the highest impact work possible? Now, no one person can know that, particularly if they're non-technical. They're just not going to come up with those brilliant ideas, and they shouldn't be responsible for it because, as I said, then everyone else just switches off and bases judges their week on story points. So for me, it really doesn't make sense to have, yes, you should have the product manager in terms of sort of grooming and streamlining, but everyone needs to have an equal stake in that. So, as we are defining the task, everyone needs to say, do we all believe that this is going to be really high impact?
Right.
So as I said, the book is targeted at small teams where you don't have a product owner, but actually I believe that everyone should really deeply think about these things. Now, whether you can execute that, as I said, depends on the second point I'll come to now of the mindset. Right? People need a foundation that is very different to how they approach work now to actually execute, put the theory into practice. So for me, that comes down to 3 core sort of pillars of decision making, as I've sort of observed them myself and other people over the last 6-7 years, which is firstly, we need to be mindful so that we are able to detach ourselves from ideas, look really objectively. For example, as a designer before, it's really easy to be like, this is so beautiful, I'm really proud of this design. But unless it's solving a very specific user problem, then it's a complete waste of time. It literally is a complete waste of time. These are pixels that will go in the bin in a week. So unless you're able to detach yourself from these ideas, and as a team, say, for example, you spent 2 weeks working really hard on this new feature you launch, but if it doesn't deliver value, you need to pull that out immediately. You need to also say, okay, we're going to strip it out, rebuild something similar, see whether it gets us to where we expect it, or we need to take it out and we pivot, right? And we move away from that strategy. You need to be mindful to have that objectivity. You need to be robust, secondly, so that you can deal with the failure and the difficulties, as I said, of constantly thinking, what makes sense to work on. And when something fails, be absolutely fine with that. To run 5 to 10 experiments, all of them fail, it's fine. These are all good learnings. But if you're not robust, you will, crumble mentally and you will just default to getting more stuff done because it doesn't have the psychological toll, let's say. And then finally, a point last point on that you mentioned for yourself, Jack, is you need to focus on the essential, right? Because there's so many things you can do as a startup founder, particularly literally, it's infinite. However, to be really effective, you not only need to cut out most things, you need to be really ruthlessly focused on, even if we cut out, say we have 10 ideas, we cut out 5, instead of low impact, you still have the 5 that all sort of make sense. You could work on 5 features and there's a good argument for all of them, but you still need to be very, very focused on reaching the conclusion with the knowledge you currently have. What is that one thing we can really have a huge amount of impact from? Even thinking about that is difficult, right? Again, so you're really you're completely changing your approach to work. And I think the difficulty really is how do you translate that from the sort of 6-7 years for me, for example, you learning this through the hard way of seeing it every day, seeing the consequences of not being mindful, not being robust, and not focusing on the essential. How do you pass that on to other people? I think it's a very difficult process. And in the book, I outline sort of the logic behind why these principles are important and how to actually cultivate the traits of being mindful, being robust, and focusing on the essential. But it is very difficult. It's always difficult, and it always will be, because product is difficult work. Really.
Yeah, I love what you said about it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail 8 times, but it can be frustrating and it can hurt morale. And I think one of the key kind of strategies to combat that is to go into every feature deployment, every feature launch, every decision as an experiment. If it's seen as an experiment from the start and not as the next big milestone, then that feedback is gold, whether it's a success or not. But going in with just be clear about your assumptions and be clear about the success metrics, and then how it goes, right? And it should be exciting than what the results are either way. Obviously, a ton of success is more exciting than a ton of failure, but that's sort of a mindset I think can combat the frustration. Another thing I know that you've talked about I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to reinforce the point. I think so. Yeah, 2 things. Interesting. Firstly, actually, is we don't want to fail, but it's necessary. Ideally, we obviously want to succeed, and there's a slight sort of celebration of failure. But as I said, it is necessary. It's a necessary part of the process. And you actually hit on such an important point that I do sort of one-on-ones with other startup founders at times to sort of help them with their product development. And one simple technique I offer them that I think is a sort of, one small thing that actually knocks down a lot of other dominoes is simply changing the phrasing of your work from a task to an experiment. You're completely right. It then takes away that it's not about what we're adding. It's really about the question we're answering. Sorry, the question we are asking and what the answer is. And whether the answer is right or wrong is not actually important, as long as we're focusing on that we're getting the learning, right? So the learning is the deliverable. A simple trick for anyone listening is to rephrase your tasks as experiments. Use that vocab in your team. It catches on really quick. Scribe, we just talked about, basically what assumption we're trying to answer. Now, all it takes is changing the title of a task. So, for example, with Scribe, we recently added writing prompts. So I could have called that task writing prompt. Instead, it's an experiment. We assume that writing prompts will increase paying users by 10%. Let's say. So that is one thing you can do. The second thing is simply adding in your, whatever you use. They're all the same, really. They're all some sort of to-do list. Say it's Trello. You simply add a column after done called invalidation. Right? This is sort of lean startup approach, where again the emphasis is not on just delivering the code, that feature. It's on waiting until you get the learning. You kind of archive that task until you've derived a learning that has said, did this answer our hypothesis? Did writing prompts get subscribers up 10% or not? In this case, it didn't, so we're taking it out, pivoting it. And that's it. Yeah, really simple. Just pull task experiments, add an invalidation column.
I love that. I think that's gold. So your tasks should be written as experiments. It should be clear that it's an assumption, not truth. Have it success criteria and be clear about that, and then build in a process of validation. So I'm sure a lot of people, myself included, have done as the far right column without a test. Validate, make sure that that's correct.
And it's the section 3 of the book actually outlines all of this, plus has templates to sort of start this practice. But again, it's something that it's a tricky one, because as I said, it's theoretically everyone goes that makes so much sense, but in practice it's difficult because you need to be calm and rational and strategic. And when you are busy and stressed, as soon as you get that thing done, that's when you breathe a sigh of relief, go have a beer on a Friday, because you've had a difficult week, and it's just that little bit extra that makes a huge impact. It's the most essential thing you could do, but just feels a little bit too far. I think that's the difficulty of it, is as I said, just really taking perspective and just realizing that very little of what you do matters. Very little of what you do matters. Therefore, you need to help yourself progress and learn discover, what is that feature that is really going to have a huge impact on our users.
You've been listening to part 3 of our interview with Henry Latham. And in part 4, we're going to wrap up our discussion and focus on the beliefs and mindset that underpin the decision-making around impact for both you and your team. You can check out the detailed show notes at signal.cafe/6. And if you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review on iTunes.